I want to continue talking today about the fundamentals of the faith. Fundamentals, of course, are the basics, the ground level studies. And somebody says, well, that's too easy. This is the hardest part, I think, of the Christian religion, is coming to understand the fundamentals of the faith. These are the most important things of all. It's the basis of our belief. It's what keeps us keeping on, is to understand the fundamentals that we subscribe to. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, Jesus was finishing up the great Sermon on the Mount, and he said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." This came as a great surprise to the people listening to him. They had been taught a religion that salvation is obtainable by what you do, basically. If you do the right things, the good things, then you're going to be saved in the final analysis. The Lord, he went through the laws throughout this sermon, and when he got done, he said, now, not everyone who does these laws is going to be saved. There's something more that has to be done than just following these rules. And those things that had to be done was, there was a need to believe in God. And without the belief in God, I'm talking about a personal belief, not just the idea that God lives somewhere, but a personal belief, relationship, if you will, with God. The two together will lead to salvation. But the one by itself, the works or the faith, if they stand alone, they die alone, because it's just not enough. When you talk about the fundamentals now, we're talking about those things that are essential to our salvation. It's a basic understanding of the rules of God, the will of God, the nature of God, the things that God would have us to do. And these are things that are very important. You got to remember that, the Lord is doing his work in this world. And you got to remember that Satan's doing his work in this world also. And there's two ways I can think of, if I were Satan, two ways I can think of that I would try to overthrow the purpose of God. One, I would have a corrupted Bible written. I would have a Bible written that was mostly true. But then there'd be 3, 4, 5 things that are relevant to salvation, but I would twist those things. And as people read my Bible, the Devil Bible, and they come across these things, they believe that this is the will of God, and reality is my will, the will of Satan. And by doing that, I know they can't do the will of God. You don't have to twist all the Bible. Just a few key places. Things about love for one another. You can downplay it. Or forgiveness. You can twist it a little bit. You remember Satan when he tempted Mother Eve in the garden. All he did was add a word to what God said. God said, "In the day you eat of this forbidden fruit, you shall die, surely die." And Satan said, "No, you shall not surely die." That wasn't a big change in words, but it was a big change, wasn't it? It led to her downfall. It doesn't take much. So I would pervert a Bible and try to get people to buy my Bible. Number two, I would I would start my own church. But I'd call it the Church of God. I'd call it the Church of God or the Church of Christ. I'd give it a name that everybody thought, when you come here, this is God's church, or this belongs to Jesus Christ. I would start me another church that didn't really follow the rules of the Bible. Most of them, yeah, they follow most of them. But I would take a few of the key items, and I would distort them. Maybe play to the desires of people. You know, when Eve believed Satan's not, when she believed that, you know why she did? Because that's what she wanted to hear. She wanted to be able to take that fruit, be as wise as God, without dying. And Satan gave her a way to do it. Yeah, go ahead and eat it, you'll be all right. And she did. People are prone to go after what they want. It's very important to us. And especially when we're young, I think we're more given to that. When we want something to be a certain way, if somebody can provide it for us, we kind of like that way. That's one of the reasons religion has flourished so much, especially in our country. There are so many various religious groups, but one of the things you notice about all the various religious groups is that everybody offers something different. I don't want to go to this church because they won't let me do this, but I go to this church because they will let me do this. What are they doing? They're playing to the wants of the people. Even our own brethren. I remember several years back down in Texas where they passed out a survey in their neighborhoods by the local congregation down in Dallas and Houston. And they asked people, what would you like to see in a church? And people filled them out and they turned them in. And sure enough, they started giving them the things they wanted. And sure enough, attendance went up. What they hoped for is what they got. If I was the devil, I would start another church. I would call it the Church of God. You can't call it Church of the Devil. Everybody knows then it's not the right church. But I call it the Church of Jesus Christ. And I said, we preach the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And then I'd preach you half a dozen lies or so. And when people had something they wanted, like something small, eating the Lord's Supper on Saturday night. Come together on the first day of the week to eat the Lord's Supper. What if we had the Lord's Supper on Saturday night? We could get the Lord's Supper out of the way on Saturday night and worship God while we were there. And then we got Sunday open to go to the lake. And people start coming up with this idea, and here I am over the Church of Satan. I said, whoa, that's not a big deal, really. Still eating the Lord's Supper, ain't you? So what I'd start doing is start meeting on Saturday night and having the Lord's Supper. And I got extra people coming to the church because they like the idea of being able to go to the church on Saturday night and get to go to the lake on Sunday. So people from other congregations around, they start coming to the Church of John, the Church of the Devil. Well, we call it Church of Christ, don't we? They start coming to that church because they get to go to the lake on Sunday instead of wasting their day by going to church on Sunday morning. You know, it wouldn't be too hard, would it? When you stop and think about it, it wouldn't be too hard. I'd give them another Bible, I'd give them another church, and I'd win the hearts of people. That's what I would do if I was Satan. Reckon what he's doing. Reckon he's ever had an idea like that before I thought of it? Tell you the truth, I got the idea from him. I can't claim ownership of it because I plagiarized the devil. I didn't feel like that's too bad since he's the devil. Think on that for just a moment while we go through this lesson. There are two basic views of the Christian religion. One view contends that Christianity existed in the first century under the guidance of inspired teachers and was exactly what God intended it to be. In other words, God himself gave birth to his church in the first century. He oversaw it. He knew what was going to be taught. He made sure it was taught. He made sure that the practices of the church in the first century were exactly what he wanted. The teaching was there, and the behavior of the congregation was there. Every stitch of it under the oversight of God himself. Now, that's what some people believe. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, the prophet agrees with that particular view. Daniel said, in the days of these kings, he's talking about the days of the Roman kings. He's talking about the rising and the fall of different empires. There was going to be the Babylonians, and then behind the Babylonians would come the Persians. Behind the Persians would come the Greeks, and then behind the Greeks would come the Romans. And then he's continuing here saying, during the days of these kings, the Roman kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Never, ever, never, ever be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Notice what he's saying now. The kingdom that the God of heaven established in the first century is going to have many challengers that take it on, that are going to try to destroy it. But throughout the years, those kingdoms, those people, are not going to be successful. They're going to be defeated. Their kingdoms will be destroyed, and my church will continue on. He's talking about the fact that the church that Jesus built cannot be shaken to its core. It will always exist, and nobody can prevent that from happening. Now, that's what the prophet prophesied. And that's what God implied when he spoke in the first century as he built his church. There's a second view, and that is that Christian religion was never intended to be static. Religion should evolve. It should be in a constant state of change. Why? Because humanity is constantly evolving. Our preferences, our desires, our tastes, what we like, what we don't like, want, don't want, these things are constantly changing. And since humanity is constantly changing, it's essential that the church constantly change in order to keep up with what humanity wants or what humanity thinks it needs. Now, this is the more popular view that exists and has always existed, is that the church has got to be willing to adapt to the preferences of people as time marches on. You know, if you're in business, and if you're not willing to adapt to the changes in society, you will not be in business very long. You're going to go out of business. One thing about business that I learned, I worked in the research and development department of a plant in Cookeville. And one thing I learned is that we were constantly changing our product, trying to meet the needs, the wants, the desires of our customers. We experimented with everything under the sun. We experimented with metals, with temperatures, times. It went on and on and on. There was no end to it. Actually, if there was an end to it, I'd have been out of a job. But that was life. Constant change. Well, if businesses operate that way, and since most men look at church, the religion, as a business, Isn't it only reasonable that the church has to change also? That's the second view that people hold. And it's a popular view. It's the more popular view, actually. It's one that people cling to. New and improved, it's always better. You see the commercial on TV and you got a new and improved Tide detergent. You've been washing with Tide for 30 years. You go to the grocery store and there's the new and improved Tide, and next to it is the old Tide. Which Tide do you grab? You grab the new one. Why? It's better. It's going to clean my clothes better. You sure about that? I'm pretty sure. They call it new and improved. Shorty, it's better. How could they call it new and improved if it wasn't? The notion of new and improved being always better is more of a fable than anything. There's no telling how many products on the shelf are said to be new and improved, and they're not new and improved. Maybe they made a difference to the color of the can the stuff comes in. Maybe they put a red, white, and blue label instead of a black and white label, and they call it new and improved. How do you know if it's new and improved in the sense that the product is better? You don't know, and most of the times it ain't no better anyway. There's only so much you can do to make it better, and then you run out of any ideas, you run out of anything you can do. But you got to call it new and improved, or you're not going to be able to sell it. It's a concept that people buy into. That's the way a lot of stuff is. They're concepts. We've been sold the bill of goods, and we believe it because it just sounds right. If it's new and improved, it should be a better product. Well, take that same principle and apply it to religion. If it's a new and improved religion, isn't it going to be a better religion? If you believe in the ever-evolving human being, then you're going to wind up believing in the new and improved religion as well. It's been working that way for 2,000 years. It's been successful too. Christianity today can be, it should be, different from first century Christianity, and yet still enjoy heaven's approval. 2,000 years down the road, of course the church is going to be different. Of course we're not going to do stuff they did 2,000 years ago. They didn't have computers 2,000 years ago. They couldn't put their words of God up on a screen while the preacher talked. Is it better? Well, some people think it is. They like the idea of being able to look at the words while I talk about the words. It's a new and improved way of presenting a lesson. I remember a time when preachers used to put up sheets and had a sermon wrote out on the sheet. And that was, for me, it was better. It was nice that I could read the sermon outline while the preacher went over it. It helped me to understand better what he was talking about. At that time, it was a sheet, and today it's a computer. Who knows what it'll be next year? Constantly looking for ways to make it better for people who are trying to understand what God wants them to know and what's wrong with that. So if we decide to eat the Lord's Supper on Saturday night, because more people will come and eat the Lord's Supper on Saturday night than will come on Sunday, isn't that better? We've got more people worshiping God. We had 200 people worshiping God. Now we got 700 people worshiping God. Isn't that better? And the church says, amen. Bound to be better. This is called reforming. Reforming. Trying to take what is and just make it better. You don't want to do away with the church. You don't want to replace the church. You just want to make the church better than it was. reforming. And it sounds good. Cardinal John Henry Newman, he declared the church has the right to alter its practices in the interest of converting the pagans. Now think about what he's saying here. It's right for the church to alter church practices if it's going to help convert the pagans. Two things comes to my mind when I think of this. The rosary. It's where they say a prayer for each bead they wear around their neck. And worshiping the Virgin Mary. Both of these practices were pagan practices. And the Roman Catholics, in order to help satisfy pagan converts, they introduced these two acts of worship, the rosary and the worship of the Virgin Mary. They introduced both acts of worship in order to soothe the consciences of pagans who had become Catholics and make their worship experience more enjoyable. A lot of us, Vanessa, you remember, we went to school in Detroit. On every Friday, what did you have for dinner at school? You ate fish. Didn't have to read a menu. When you went to school, you know good and well you was going to eat fish. Because a Catholic could not eat meat on Friday. That was taboo. No way, Jose. And we ate fish every Friday, and it wasn't good either. Well, do they eat fish today? No. They're back to eating meat today. There was a time when it was profitable to eat fish and do away with the meat. I don't know what the reason was, but there was a reason for it. And between that time and this time, apparently they got a lot of complaints about fish. And the menu was changed from fish to you can eat any kind of meat you want to. It's okay. He's saying it's okay to do that as long as it helps in converting pagans. That's us. If there are things we want, things we need in religion to make us happy, adaptable to Roman Catholicism, he said, that's just fine. It's okay. We can do it. That was put forth by John Henry Newman back in 1920. He conceded that the use of such items as burning incense, holy water, sacerdotal vestments, and the list goes on, are all of pagan origins. The Catholic Church took all of those practices and many, many more that belonged to pagan worship, and they put it in Roman Catholicism worship. But their use, he said, is acceptable because they are sanctified by their adoption into the church. What does he mean? Here's what he means. When the pagans used holy water, it was a sin. But Catholics, we can use holy water, and it's not a sin. Because if we use holy water, the holy water is sanctified by the very idea that we use it. If you go through the practices of Roman Catholicism, you will be absolutely shocked at how many of their practices came out of pagan worship simply for the reason, the purpose of being able to reach the pagans and talk them into becoming Catholics. And you know what? It worked. It worked. And Roman Catholic Church grew in leaps and bounds by following that practice. Martin Luther, he was a Catholic priest. In the year 1510, Luther, for the first time in his life, made a trip to Rome, Italy. And when he got there, his jaw dropped to the floor. The city of Rome was a Sodom and Gomorrah. He would never expected that. The Vatican was there. The Pope is there. The top priests in the world are all here. How could the city of Rome be a sewer? And then he stayed there for a little while, and after he was there for a little while, he discovered that not only was the city of Rome a sewer, the priesthood was also a sewer. There was nothing that went on in the city of Rome that wasn't going on in the church. All the vices were practiced by the clergy. And he couldn't tolerate it. And it'd eat at him, and it'd eat at him. 7 years went by. And he was in Wittenberg, Germany. The year was 1517. And he had written what was labeled 95 Theses. There are 95 complaints he had with the Roman Catholic Church. And he had these nailed to the door of the church building. Harold Brown said it was not Luther's intention to find a new church. From the time of the Reformation, there were new churches. First, there was the Lutheran Church, and then there was the Reformed Church, and finally you had the Anglican Church. From its beginning, the Reformation created new churches as no other movement had succeeded in doing. Now, let's break that down just a little bit. The Reformation means the idea of reforming the church. Luther was absolutely disgusted with what he's seen in the church, but he didn't want to replace the church. That was the wrong way to go about it. He wanted to reform it. He wanted to make it better. That was the purpose of his 95 Theses. These were the things that had to be changed to return the Roman Catholic Church back to what it used to be. He had an honest heart. I believe with all my soul that Luther was a good man. He had good intentions. He wanted to do what was right. No one can doubt his courage. He was a courageous man. He took on the beast in the book of Revelation by himself. But he made a fundamental mistake. He wanted to reform the church of the devil. See, the Roman Catholic Church wasn't the church that God built. The Roman Catholic Church grew much, much, much larger than the church that God built. And the church that God built became so small, so insignificant, it wasn't even recognizable in the earth. It was dominated by this beast that we read about in the book of Revelation that was so big it could devour anything it chose to. Luther wasn't aware of that. He didn't understand the difference between the church that God built and the Roman church. So rather than trying to restore the church, back to what God built. He wanted to reform the Catholic Church and to make it what it once was. In the beginning, it was much, much more calm and tamer. It looked much, much more like the church that God built. And that was his hope. Instead, he wound up with what's called the Lutheran Church. So now you've got the church that God built, you got the Roman Church, and now you've got what's called the Lutheran Church, named after Martin Luther. And then as men continued trying to reform the church, there was another church popped up called the Reformed Church. And then there was another church popped up called the Anglican Church. And it went on this way for 500 years. Man after man after man would raise up. Good men. Good men. I got nothing to say harsh about Luther or Calvin or John Wesley. Well, I may have some questions about Calvin, but not much. But the rest of them, I believe with all my heart, they had good hearts. I just don't think they understood the fundamental error they were making. And they were trying to do something that could not be done. Let me ask you a question. If you try to reform a church built by the devil, what do you wind up with no matter what you do to it? You're still going to have the church of the devil. It's always going to be what it always was. Even if you go back to its exact roots, it's still going to be what it was when it began. But this is what people tried to do. I feel so sorry for him, especially like Luther. He tried so hard to do good, and it seems that his work was all in vain. The evolution of the Christian religion, Protestant sects have produced a similar evolutionary Christianity, as did the Roman Church. You've got the Roman Church, and the church is influenced by Romanism. And then you've got what's known as Protestants, protesters. They disagreed with the whole concept of Catholicism. They didn't want to be like Roman Catholics or the Lutherans, the Anglicans. They thought they missed the mark. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. They wanted to be something different. In the Standard Manual for Baptist Churches, probably the most popular book in the Baptist Church, authored by Edward Hiscox, says, "It is most likely that in the apostolic age, when there was but one Lord." What? It is most likely that in the apostolic age, when there was only one Lord, one faith, and one baptism, and no differing denominations, the baptism of a convert, by that very act, constituted him a member of the church, and at once endowed him with all the rights and privileges of full membership. And in that sense, baptism was the door into the church. Wait a minute, man, we'll think about this a minute. There was a time when there was only one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Well, how many are there today? Well, according to Hiscox, according to Baptist theology, there are many today, as opposed to what there was then. Back then, there was one Lord, one faith, one baptism. There were no other denominations. All that existed was the church that God built. And there were no other churches. You didn't have the church of this one, and this one. One church in the whole earth. And that was the church that God built. It's the only one that existed. And there was the one baptism. And whenever a convert was baptized, by the very act of the baptism, that person was added to the Lord's church by the Lord himself. He said there was a time when baptism was the door into the church. Now it's different. Now it's different. Different according to whom? Who changed it? And what gave him the right to change it? If that was the church that God built, the way that God wanted it built, and that church is supposed to remain consistent into eternity, who had the right to change anything? I don't know. Apparently somebody did. Somebody that we're not aware of. No, it wasn't right. This is Reformation. Makes Baptist churches better. You can start new things. You can start new churches. It's okay. As long as you're making things better. And it goes on, and it goes on. When the Lord established a system of religion, its obligation must remain precisely as delivered for as long as it is designed to last. No man, no body of men has the authority to modify it. Deuteronomy 5:32-33, this is what we got started on. You shall be careful to do as the Lord your God has commanded you. You shall not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God has commanded you. Why? That you may live, that it may be well with you, that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand. When God built his church, he wanted us to follow the pattern he gave us in the New Testament for his church. And he didn't give us the right to change it. As a matter of fact, we can go a step farther. You should not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it. Why? This way you can keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I commanded you. We studied about this last week, 1 Kings 13, remember? Young prophet, the old prophet, King Jeroboam. Jeroboam changed the religion of northern Israel, changed the priesthood, changed the place of worship, changed the time of worship. Remember? He reformed what he thought was the church of Israel. 21 times Jeroboam is said to be the man who made Israel to sin. That's how God remembered King Jeroboam. What we see today is normal for us. It's all normal. When you go down the road and you see the church of this one, the church of that one, it's all normal. We grew up that way. We've been looking at it forever. We think nothing about it. What does God think about it? You know, it doesn't matter what we decide here or what we decide in our own minds. It's going to be that way from now until time ends. But what does God think about that? Is that what he wants? Is that what he wants of us? How are we supposed to live and practice our walk with God? Reforming? Or by restoring the one true church that God built originally? Oh, it's not thinking you're better than anybody else. All this stuff we're charged and accused with. It has nothing to do with thinking we're better than anybody. It comes down to the difference between this group of people believes that you listen to God, and the other groups of people believe you can listen to men. And whether you listen to God or whether you follow what men say, doesn't matter. You're good. You're going to be saved by grace. Que sera, sera. But it doesn't work that way. If you believe that Jesus died for your sins, if you can repent and give your life to him, you should. You should. It's good for you and good for your folks. As Christians, we are to help perpetuate the church that God built, the church that he loves. We are to advertise her according to the instructions we've been given, without addition, subtraction, or modification. We're not supposed to be afraid. We're not supposed to run and hide. You know, I wished I had another hour and a half right now to keep on talking. But I can't. Nobody will ever invite me to dinner again if I do. Think. Please think. Won't you come while we stand and while we sing?